If we cannot mock the sacred, we cannot truly question authority, because what is sacred changes in time. So yes, blasphemy can be horrible, hurtful, disrespectful, but it must be allowed because the alternative is silence. And silence, as we've seen too often, is where tyranny begins. Manik Govinda, thank you very much for a fabulous letter on liberty. It's so important that you laid out a chronology about blasphemy that begins to creak as you go further and further into the letter. And especially when you arrive at the point when you really see that Islam is a real problem. I want to offer something different, though, in my reflection. I want to speak to the hurty, the people who are feeling hurty. I want to speak to those who would act on behalf of the hurt, as they were trying to do in the Republic of Ireland, introducing some of the most draconian anti-free speech legislation. When I was growing up in the Catholic in Ireland, I used to hear the voice of the Reverend Ian Paisley booming across the airways. He was fierce, passionate, and utterly convinced that he spoke for God. The Reverend Ian Paisley, founder of the Democratic Unionist Party and a fiery Protestant preacher, was often accused by his critics, especially Catholics and more moderate Protestants, of blasphemy. Whether he was a blasphemer depends on theological and moral interpretation, but he certainly used shocking, dramatic, and provocative language. He said things that stung, things that hurt. He said things that made me angry. He called Catholics idolaters. He called my church the whore of Babylon. He ridiculed the doctrine of transubstantiation, one of the most sacred things in Catholicism, when the host is transformed into the body and blood of Christ. He called that turning God into a biscuit. The Church of Rome is a blood-stained harlot, he said, and those who commit fornication with her will share her damnation. In 1988, when Paisley interrupted Pope John Paul II's address to the European Parliament, standing up to shout, "I denounce you as the Antichrist." I was a child then, but I still remember how it felt. Those words weren't abstract theology. They were about my family, my mother, my community. They were blasphemy, aimed straight at the very heart of what we believed. And yet, I would never have wanted Ian Paisley silenced. Because if we silence people for blasphemy, for offending what's sacred, then whoever shouts, "I'm offended," the loudest gets to decide what the rest of us can say. And that's not a free society. Blasphemy is hurtful. It can be ignorant, rude, even vile. But that's not the point. Freedom of speech isn't there to protect polite conversation. It exists to protect the things people most want to ban. When someone mocks your faith, or your symbols, or your sacred rituals, it can cut deep. I know that from experience. But that pain is also proof that the idea means something to you. And the test of faith, real faith, is whether it can withstand challenge, not whether it can silence it. Over time, I came to realize something strange. Ian Paisley, in all his thunder and fury, made me think harder about what I believed. He made me argue back. He made me own my own faith instead of simply inheriting it. That's what free speech does. It's uncomfortable, it's messy, but it's how we grow. And to those who say blasphemy insults God, I'd say this. If your God is shaken by a cartoon, or a book, or a desecrated communion host even, then maybe your God isn't as all-powerful as you think. The God I grew up with created the goddamn universe. He doesn't need a libel lawyer. He doesn't need the police to protect his reputation. If your God can't handle mockery, maybe it's time you got a better one. The freedom to blaspheme is really the freedom to think. It's the foundation of every other liberty. Because once we decide that certain ideas are too sacred to question, we hand over our minds to someone else's authority. Courtesy and kindness, yes, they matter, but they must be chosen, not enforced. Respect that's demanded by law isn't respect at all, it's submission. The freedom to blaspheme, as Manik says, is on the front line of all freedoms. If we cannot mock the sacred, we cannot truly question authority, because what is sacred changes in time. Once it was the Catholic Church. Today it might be gender ideology, identity, or the state itself. And I certainly want to have a go at all three. To defend the freedom to blaspheme is not to endorse mockery or cruelty. It's to defend the right to dissent. A society that cannot bear offence is a society that cannot grow. So yes, blasphemy can be horrible, hurtful, disrespectful, but it must be allowed because the alternative is silence. And silence, as we've seen too often, is where tyranny begins. Because when we lose the freedom to offend, we lose the freedom to think. Thank you.